Episode 84, Undercover FBI Agent, Jack Garcia. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Jack Garcia. Jack is the former undercover FBI agent who infiltrated the Gambino crime family of Cosa Nostra for nearly 3 years, resulting in the arrest and conviction of 32 mobsters. He worked on over 100 major undercover investigations over his 26-year career. He wrote a New York Times bestseller called Making Jack Falcone. An undercover FBI agent takes down a mafia family. Well, welcome to the show. So I can call you Jack?
Yes, Jack, right.
Okay, but that's not your actual given name, right?
No, I've actually had a few names. My real name is Joaquin, but no one could have said that back in the 70s when I was a kid. So they gave me the nickname Jock because I played football. Mm-hmm. So then as I went into the FBI, I realized Jock is not really a professional name. So I took Joaquin and translates to Jack, and the man formerly known as Jock and Joaquin was born. So I'm Jack.
Jack it is. So before we get into you and your story and everything, Jack, around the time I think I reached out to you to do this interview, I think it might have been that very week, the news came out that this well-known celebrity chef, David Ruggiero, who had been living this double life, I guess, as a made man in the mafia. And he was actually related, as I understand it, to Carlo Gambino, who was the head boss of the infamous Gambino crime family, which, of course, you sort of took down. Do you know about this guy? Did you read about that story?
Yeah, I read it. You know, it's funny how sometimes you read these articles and somehow everybody's either related or an associate to Carlo Gambino. And I've never heard of him before, not to say that he doesn't exist or he's not a relative, but I did hear about it. But obviously, he's capitalizing on the fact that he is related to the infamous Carlo Gambino, who, by the way, was a very small, gentle type man who yielded a lot of power.
Yeah, I don't know all the motivations, of course. I don't know this person, but I mean, he was a pretty well-known celebrity chef. I mean, he had his own TV show. He had written books. He was interviewed every possible media outlet. It's not like he needed attention or needed the recognition. I mean, if anything, it's probably a potential problem for him to come out in any way, which leads me to sort of ask the question here as we jump into you. Aren't you nervous at all to be talking to me? I mean, you are Jack Garcia. This is not a, some pseudonym or something. Shouldn't you be like in the FBI, protection program or something?
It's kind of interesting, but the way the mob actually works is the last thing they want to do is leave a body on the street because that's bad for business, and especially a body belonging to a law enforcement officer. So the days of old where the mob guys, like in Philadelphia, were leaving, I think was 20 some odd bodies in a year on the street are pretty much over. And that's evident by the fact that if you look around some of these podcasts nowadays, you have Sammy the Bull Gravano has a podcast. Michael Francese has a podcast. And I can go on and on with these former mobsters who actually cooperated are now living in plain sight. And the reason being is the mob has morphed and they don't want to take anyone out because, again, there are millions of cameras out there in the world. That's number one. Number two, they know the FBI is just going to go right at them. So the old days where if you were a rat or you were an infiltrator, they were going to take you out and make you swim with the fishes, those days are kind of over. It's very rare that somebody is killed. As far as I'm concerned, I think because having done so much undercover in my lifetime as a federal agent, the mob guy understands that that was my job, that I'm not really an informant. I'm really an FBI agent who went undercover. So that sets me in a different plane. And everything that I did and whatever I testified was honest. I was not, making it up for their sake. So they know their job is to avoid being get by us, and our job is to get them. So I did my job, and I think they respect it. But I am cautious. Don't get me wrong, Glenn. I don't drive around foolishly. I don't go back to the haunts where I used to go.
I was going to say, so you don't frequent, you went to all these fancy Italian restaurants and everything back in the day. You don't go to those anymore.
I miss those great restaurants that I went to. I mean, I used to have waiters trip over themselves to take care of me. Now I'm standing online in the bar waiting for my table. So,
Right.
so I'm just a regular schmo now. Yes. So you miss those kind of days, but you don't want to do is poke the tiger in the eye.
All right.
That's how I lived my life. But I'm cautious because there's always that wannabe guy who wants to make an impression. And next thing you know, may see me. Next thing you know, I got a baseball hat to my head. Now, if that was to ever happen, not only would the FBI investigate, I'm sure the mob itself would take care of that guy because we're bringing that action brought so much heat onto them.
Yeah, I gotcha. So, want to go back to the origin story of you, of course, and you're from Cuba originally.
Yes.
But your family escaped. I think you were just 9 years old at the time.
Yes.
And I know the conditions under Castro were not great, which is why they escaped. But it doesn't sound like the early years in the U.S. were that rosy either, probably compared to maybe what they had envisioned. Do you remember that period when you were 9 coming to the States and what those first few years were like?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. First of all, we didn't speak English. So we left Cuba. My father had to leave like a year before us because he was a government employee, and a lot of government employees past were marked for death. So the stormtroopers came to the house. We had to move. We went to my grandparents' home, and there my father, here in America, raised enough money by working 3 jobs to get us to come to America. So sure enough, we came here. We were in Miami with relatives, but he was in New York. And then we said, well, what about if we live down here in Miami, like the rest of the Cubans are down here? And he felt that there was too many Cubans in Miami. So we went up to where he was living in Washington Heights. And there we started the process of, learning English and dealing with the cold weather. I never saw snow. And, we didn't have coats with us. So we had to go to whatever local charity would provide us with coats. And it was we were just transplanted. I remember leaving my friends and crying. My family lost all of their belongings. We just came with our clothes on our back. So it was a tough situation, but we thought it was going to be temporary. My dad really felt that this was going to be another banana republic. And within 6 months or a year, Castro would be overthrown and then we go back home. Well, that never happened.
But when you went up north, you went to a pretty tough neighborhood, didn't you?
Yes, it was Washington Heights, which it was tough. It was a tough way to grow up. And then my father knew that. So one day he came home and he says, we're going to move like the Jeffersons, moving on up. So from Washington Heights, we went to the Bronx. Even that makes any sense,
a quarter step up, I guess.
Yes, exactly. I don't know how that's a step up or a step down. So we went to the Bronx and we lived, and it was a tough neighborhood. It was a mix of all the races. You were either aspire to be a cop or you were chased by a cop. It's one or the other.
I mean, did you have some incidents? Did you run into trouble?
Well, I ran into trouble as far as the first time I encountered racism. As a kid, I was playing baseball with the Spalding with the other kids on the block with my broken English, and a ball went into this lady's home. And next thing you know, I asked for the ball. She said no. The next day, that ball was in our mailbox, and it was inscribed, "Move you speak. So I didn't know what that meant. So I asked my parents, and my father said, "Who did this?" And stay away from this person. And I was devastated. You're a child. You don't know about racism.
Hmm.
And that's when you first found out that it was. And some people were impacted in the Bronx that they were now having Hispanics who didn't speak English move into their community. But as far as with the kids, kids are kids. We all got along. There was never any situation with the police. My father insisted that, once the lights came on at night, you better get your butt home, which we did. And then he worked hard to get me from a public school to go to a Catholic school, which eventually I went to a school known as Mount St. Michael Academy. So he lived as sort of my mother. They worked not for possessions, they worked solely to get us an education. One of the reasons I think I stayed out of trouble
Yeah.
is because a big kid like me, I was recruited to play football. And I think being in a sports setting in a high school kind of kept me away from the drugs, from doing things that were bad, because we had structure. You finished high school,
Hmm.
you went to practice, you were in a team with good guys. And I think sports played a lot of a role, tremendous role, to keeping not only me, but other kids in the straight and narrow.
And I know a lot of your success later in life as an undercover was just you've got a very affable personality. People naturally gravitate toward you. Did that show up? Did that manifest when you were young? Were you a very likable kid?
Yes, I was my mother's favorite. I was the middle child.
So she tells you.
Oh, she told me. I mean, even to this, before she passed on, I would say to her, "Mom, who was your favorite?" She goes, "Of course, it was Joaquinito," as she called me,
Yeah, yeah.
And because I was kind of different. My sister was, at home and following the footsteps of my mom. My brother was kind of quiet, very studious, went to Fordham Law School, where I was more like, I went away to college. I went first to Texas, then I went to Richmond. So I did things that I don't know. She kind of liked, and I get teased by my siblings that I was always mom's favorite, And but my personality was that, like you hit it on the head. I used the same personality that you're hearing me now when I worked on the cover. I didn't assume to be a badass. I didn't assume to be a tough guy. I was me. I always looked at it. You could start at the bottom and escalate. But if you're up here, you can't go down because first impressions are your lasting impressions.
Well, I think your dream to join the FBI started with some Al Pacino movie that you watched. And I don't think I ever saw this one.
You have to see that. It's a classic. It was called Serpico.
Serpico. What is it about Serpico that, grabbed you in such a profound way?
Here I am in college. We're playing football. So before the games, we go see a movie. So we go see this movie. And here's Al Pacino, right? Back in the 70s, long hair, a beard. He lived in the city. He had a sheep dog, had a beautiful girlfriend, a motorcycle. And then he works in the NYPD as kind of like undercover, that he's trying to catch corruption. He's trying to get drug deals as well, looking with the long hair as opposed to the straight cut hair. And I kind of said, here I am a senior. What am I going to do? It comes to that point in college. What are you going to do in college? Well, I had no idea. And I said, this is what I want to be. I want to be an NYPD police officer, and I want to work undercover.
What is it, though, about that life? Was it just the glamour, the attention, all that? Or was there something about, pursuing justice that was some kind of North Star of yours?
Well, a little you could say that, but it was kind of the action. I felt, and my father was an accountant. My brother's a tax lawyer. My sister's saying, I look at that as boring, right? I wanted some action. I want to go to work and I don't know what to expect next. I like the chase. I like the fact that you're putting away bad guys. I like the fact you're cleaning the neighborhoods. And it was something that I felt that I wanted, I needed in my life. I didn't want a job that would be mundane, where I would just come into an office, clock in and clock out. And what I saw with police, and of course, growing up, seeing police officers, I said, this is kind of what I want to be in life, because it changes. You meet with people, and it's an opportunity to clean up the neighborhood.
So what did it take to get into the FBI? Like, what kind of screening process was there?
Well, it was really, first of all, unknown to me. I went and I applied for the Bureau at that time. It was in college in Richmond, my senior year, filled out the paperwork, didn't hear anything. Then I also applied for the NYPD, the Secret Service, everyone, but back in the 70s, nobody was hiring. So I kind of got frustrated because the dream that I was to pursue, which was law enforcement, I couldn't get a job. So I started looking to other, things. Sure enough, I landed a job here and there. Then one day I'm watching Univision, which is the Spanish station on TV, and I see this non-native Spanish speaker, an American guy, butchering the Spanish language and telling you how they're recruiting Hispanics. And they're looking for Spanish speakers. So I immediately get on the phone the next day and said, hey, I got an application. I just saw some guy talking about how they're looking for Spanish speakers. Well, I'm your man. Look no further. So they said, well, let me look into that. Sure enough, the next day they call me, said, we reviewed your application and we noticed that you're not an American citizen. So I had to then go through that process. And once I became a citizen in 1976, then the application was starting to get processed. So all of a sudden, the background is happening, and boom, I get my orders that I am going to be going to Quantico to become a special agent of the FBI. What else could I ask for? My dream was coming true.
But, you mentioned that you didn't exactly fit the FBI stereotype. Was that just about the fact that you're Hispanic, or were there other aspects that made you stand apart?
Well, there was a lot of other things, and it's kind of funny because after I got into the FBI, I filed for Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, and it came back noting that inasmuch as he's Cuban, the possibility could be that he's a mole. So I wouldn't hire him because it took me a long time to get processed in the FBI application. So that was one of the things. Keep in mind, I was the second Cuban-born FBI in the Bureau at the time. So that was one of the factors. The second was my weight. I was always a big guy, haven't played football, loved to eat, and the Bureau stuck to those standard weight charts where a guy 6'4" is supposed to be like 190, 200 pounds, which I think I was 12 years old when I was 190 pounds, So I don't know what that was. So that was another, issue for me. But it was something that I felt, I was just very excited to have gotten in there because this was, my dream. I didn't look at it, well, I'm a Cuban. I got in. But later on, you started finding out that, the fact that I wasn't hired or delayed because I was a Cuban and the possibility exists that I could be a mole, I found that ludicrous. I mean, that's not the case. I mean, if we hate what Castro did more than somebody who works against that, you know what I mean? We lived it. So I just found that to be a very tough pill to swallow for me to have been delayed simply because of that. But, the weight, that, and then finally I had to go through I think it was 16 weeks at the time with a heavy concentration in firearms, fit test, and academics. Now, I went down there the first time. I showed up and I got weighed and I was given a choice. My weight did not meet the chart. So I was told, you either resign and lose the weight and you could come back, or if you stay on, you're going to be fired and you can't go back. Now, 12 days have passed. I was working in the prosecutor's office. I got a going away party. Now, what am I going to do? Do I come back home and say, hey, what happened to you? How come you didn't go in the FBI? Well, I was too fat. I couldn't get in the bureau. I mean, and I told them, I said, look, I played college football. I can get into shape. There's nothing you're going to do that it hasn't been done to me. We done 3 days, 3 a days in the heat. This is nothing compared. But anyway, rules are rules. So I went home. I got depressed. So like a good nervous eater that I am, not knowing what the bureau is from the outside, I went home and found my new best friend, Entenmann's. So I started eating, started gaining more weight until my class counselor sent me a postcard with all the signatures of those in my class saying, hey, they shafted you, lose the weight, come back. So suddenly, I started working out, got to the weight. I think I had to weigh 230 pounds. And finally, before I got sworn in, I had to be weighed in. So I go see the agent in charge, and he actually took a scale out, set me, and says, all right, you weigh that amount, go off to Quantico, which I did, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Wow. So I know further downstream when you got into this whole, mafia as an undercover, there's like this mob school and all sorts of training. But the early assignments, I think, were all around narcotics. So when you're starting out as an undercover and you've never done this before, is there formal training, or did they just sort of throw you out there and figure it out? How do you start out knowing what the heck to do as you're taking on this new role?
Well, keep in mind of the time. This is 1980, 8 years after Hoover died. At that time, the Bureau did not mirror the demographics in our society. So there weren't many Hispanics or Black or female agents or Asian agents. So I come in, the Bureau is at that time getting into narcotics. Now comes a kid who grew up in the Bronx, knows the streets a little, has a way about him. It doesn't look like your standard, three-piece suit with the wingtip shoes and a guy who is from middle America trying to buy, dope on the street or doing that. So I was kind of like a shoe-in. I became all of a sudden like, hey, you speak Spanish. Hey, you look the part. You're going undercover.
Even though you knew the streets, I'm assuming you're now having to do things like, orchestrate drug deals and get into doing things that you hadn't done before. You were, I assume, a pretty, straight and narrow, if you will. So how are you figuring out how to assume this new identity and, infiltrate this world that you might have known of, but you weren't certainly immersed in that world before?
Right. Well, it's a great question. The fact that I was blessed to have worked with some amazing agents who really had some amazing informants, because that's what law enforcement is about. There's really no one person who could solve every crime. You're as good as the information on the street. These informants, I wound up meeting with them. Their stories became my stories. What happened, how you talk to them, how you do the deal, I learned. I was a sponge, just sucking everything up. Because this way I didn't want to go out there and say, do you have any, cocaine, talk like a cop. But I learned from that, and they made them available. And these agents with the vast experience that they had, except they couldn't do the undercover part. They could work the case, they could work the prosecution, which is, hey, there's nothing wrong. Not everybody can do undercover work, just like I can't do what they do. So they educated me. They brought me forward where I felt comfortable being around people and also meet the requirements that we have to in order to prosecute them and eventually, convict them at the end. Because one thing about the FBI, we are conviction oriented. We just don't want to put bracelets on you and then you walk out the next couple of weeks or you beat the rap. We want to make sure once we arrest you, you're pretty much the percentage rate is so high that you're either going to take a plea or you're going to go to jail. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from that. I was like soaking everything in. I have my first couple of deals where I'm out there meeting with guys. I've always, you try to figure out an identity. I
Right.
figure, let me be myself. Just like I said to you earlier, just start off being a jovial guy. I mean, keep in mind, I'm 6'4". Now I'm about 395. Now, right away I walk in, that's a look. I grew my hair. I got a goatee. I walk in. I don't have to try to sell you. It's automatically you look at me and you go, oh, that guy ain't a cop. What is he? So how I carried myself, how I spoke, that's all part of the shtick that you have as an undercover agent. And that's kind of what I did. I mean, I was blessed that nobody ever really tapped me down, patted me down for a wire. I know that because I just didn't look the type. And what I did is when you have a big guy around people who maybe are these drug dealers who weren't my height, they kind of feel like I'm around a teddy bear. I'm like, this guy's going to be okay, man. We're going to do this deal. This guy knows what he's doing. And, they drop their guard. And then we work on catching their greed, and they're done.
Well, I know there were at least a couple instances where, some point along the way with one of these deals, they wanted you to go in some, I don't know, a warehouse or some location. And you just had this sense of, if I go in that place, I'm not coming out. Like you clearly had some sort of sixth sense to know when danger was lurking. And I don't mean, no one's pulling a gun on you or anything, but you just seem to have a sense of really knowing your way around, if that makes sense.
Yes, and Glenn, keep in mind, that's called experience. That's how you learn and you deal. Having learned from my previous deal, what it was in a nutshell was we wound up trying to buy some coke from these gangbangers from Harlem. And they showed up and then they said, well, we don't have the stuff. We got the Colombians who have it. They're coming. And then more people start showing up. Now we have a full set. Now, I know when I'm doing my undercover, I'm well protected. I know I got my team, and these are guys and gals who are just amazing as far as fitting in to make sure that nothing happens to me. So here they come. They're saying, look, it's a little too hot here. Why don't we go to this place down the block? I got it covered. I got the mother load there. I got the shipment yesterday. You could go through it. Now, a new agent would have like, oh my God, the mother load, it's coming. I can't wait. Instead of 9 kilos, I get 500 kilos. Hey, a kilo means nothing to me. I said, no, my life is more important than that. So I said to the guy, listen, because I would dress up like I'm a santero, which is like Santeria. I would have the beads, wear white. It was an acting job, right? So I go in, I said, listen, I talked to my madrina. She says, this is a good spot. She spoke to the gods. Everything is fine here. So now they want to move on. I wasn't going anywhere. I said, you know what? Let me go give her a call. That's a good idea. You call her. I walk over to the diner. I'm on the phone. I call the guy who watches my back all the time. And he says to me, he says, listen, you don't have no idea what's in the parking lot. I says, you got some guys here. They're up to no good, have no business being here. And it says, we're taking this down. I said, perfect, because you don't move. I said, you got it. Next thing you know, I got view of the diner of everybody going down. We wound up arresting 9 individuals, okay? The 9 individuals were all brought in, and the story was that one group was going to take me hostage, and they had the tape, they had the Tech 9s, they had the Glocks ready to take my money because I was buying it, and they were going to take the Colombians' dope. So it was going to be a rip. Now, had I gone to there, I would not probably be here today because nobody were able to watch my back. So getting back to your stories, yes, it's a sixth sense that you get, but you also have to stick to the script. You can't ad lib, only face-to-face ad lib. But if you're going to do this thing here, that's where it goes. Either if it happens there or I walk away. And I've done that before. Guy goes, no, it's too hot here. I says, all right, you don't want to do it here? Fine. I walk away. Next day, the guy's calling me. Come on, we'll do it. So it doesn't matter. Your life and your safety is paramount when you work undercover. You don't make any alteration to the tactical plan because that's how you get hurt and others get hurt.
Yeah. I mean, there's a plan, but it still seems like there's a fair amount of improv. If you want to go
Yes,
off that, the fact that you're an actor, right? You're an actor that is constantly having to modify the script, if you will, based on circumstances. You can't remove yourself every 30 minutes and say, "Oh, let me go talk to this other person." Let me come back. Hey, what do I do now? Right? So
right.
you're having to sort of make it up on the fly in a lot of these cases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, those are the ad libs are okay, but the important thing was that I didn't go with them. And next thing you know, if you're surveilling this, you see me get in a car with them going to another location. That's the pucker situation for the agents. Like, where's this guy going? Where the hell are we going? What's going to happen? So all of those factors play into the ad lib. So my
Okay.
thing was I kind of kept it where we settled on it. And I used to pick, Glenn, I'm sure you're familiar with New York City. I would go like on 52nd Street between First Avenue. It was a one way in and one way out. So I would ask the guy to meet me there. So my surveillance arrest teams would be at the top. So it would be monitoring that they couldn't come out of the woodwork. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt protected.
Gotcha. So I get, your look, the fact that you speak Spanish. I can see the setup for these narcotics cases. Now let's talk about the mob. I don't quite get this setup here. I wouldn't look at you and say, this is someone out of the Gambino crime family here. So how did you pull that one off in terms of the initial setup? Like, what was the context of how you're going to walk into this situation?
Well, that was something I never planned. What happened was I had worked a Russian organized crime case, and the case agent of that investigation was the case agent of this investigation. So he was an Italian American, and he calls me out of the clear and he says, "Hey, listen, we got this case that," and again, when you start a case, you don't anticipate the result, especially in a mob case, that you're going to wind up hooking up with this captain of the Gambinos and be proposed for membership. Okay. I got these guys, these mobsters, I got these Albanians, all of these people in. You'd be the perfect guy to this. And I said, we want you to pose off as an Italian. You think you could do it? And I says, well, you know me. So he says, I think you could. And what we'll do is we'll set up two identities. One where you are an Italian American, and the other one would be you're half Cuban and you're half Italian. So I said, well, that could work. So that's how I was kind of asked to do this. I had no prior knowledge of working organized crime. All of my experience came from narcotics, murder for hires, police corruption. Because to be honest with you, it was not of interest to me. I never really pursued it because it had nothing to do with that. I was dealing with cartels from Colombia, Mexico. To me, that became like, I guess, to an actor, it was the role of a lifetime. Like, wow, maybe I could pose as an Italian. Wouldn't that be cool? It was a challenge, especially one that was late in my career. Because I hate to pat myself on the back and say, I've done everything else, but I've never done this. This could be interesting. So I gave it a shot. It was all like on a lark.
So half Cuban, half Italian.
There were two stories. One, I was fully Italian, and the other one was Cuban and Italian.
Oh, I thought you were picking from one of those two.
No, I had both as a possibility. I go into this case. No one questioned me. No one thought of me being anything but Italian.
Did you speak differently? Did you have to have an accent or something?
Well, I have my New York accent, as you know, I have. So, it really wasn't. And they weren't, the majority of these guys don't even speak Italian because they're more Italian American. The old timers do. But I didn't purport to say my role became I'm a third generation Sicilian American. I grew up in the Miami, Florida area. I was kind of raised by Cubans because I was a drug dealer. So that was my role. And then I became an investor in the strip club. So no one questioned whether I was Italian. In fact, if anything, was like they knew I was part Sicilian. They would always call me a CG, like, a guy's a CG, and I used to get a kick out of it. But I did learn from the Italian case agent the pronunciation of foods. I learned from them the lifestyle. Also learned about what the mob is all about.
Well, because if you wouldn't pronounce the foods correctly, and eating such a big deal, it's such a part of that ingrained in their culture, it would just set off alarms, I assume.
Well, exactly. You can't say there, hey, pass me the mozzarella. It's the mozzarella.
That would have been the end of the case.
Yeah, exactly. Like mozzarella. Who is this guy? And you hear clicks of guns, Who is this guy? So you had to learn, like, I grew up in that culture. But the thing that I found interesting, though, Glenn, was that unlike the other cases that I worked, the many cases where I went as a drug dealer or a hitman or whatever, I was in control. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't have to show you my bona fides, and I have to prove any of that to you. But in the mob, it's a different world, because in that world, there is that accountability. There is control. So it isn't I can come in and wing it. Like if I'm with a drug dealer, the guy says, hey, man, who are you? Who are you with? I go, who am I with? Who are you talking to? You can't say that with the mob guys, because there's deference you have to show. You have to, it's all like the movie Godfather. Everything is tradition, history, and it's that. So I was I learned because of the case agent, I learned how to behave. So like if the boss I was with said to me, come pick me up, it's going to rain, bring an umbrella. And I look out the window and it's a beautiful sunny day. Guess what? I'm bringing an umbrella. Why? Because he said it was going to rain. That's the way that mob mentality works.
Well, yeah, I noticed there are all these, mafia behavioral norms. So, like, you don't keep a wallet. You just carry a wad of cash and you wrap it in a rubber band that they use to wrap broccoli. And you never ask for a menu at a restaurant. You don't ask what's on tap. You always need to leave huge tips. Like there was a certain amount of swagger you had to have, right? When you walk into a restaurant, like you own the place. Is that all part? I know you went to this mob school. That's all part of this mob school training, or just things you're picking up, like watching and absorbing?
No, well, it was a little mixture of both, but it's very true. It's how you carry yourself. You have to be confident. I mean, I've met wise guys who are broken down valises. They're broke, but yet when they go out, they got themselves a big knot. And the reason they call it a knot is because it looks like a knot of wood. And there they got the broccoli band, and they walk at swagger. They got the pinky ring. They got the Brioni suit or the Zegna. Everything. Look, the cars are impeccable. You could eat out of the car. It's all like Central Cast and Goodfellas, And that's kind of all of that goes with that life. When you at a restaurant, everything is, I got this, pay. But the only people who don't pay are usually the captains. Certain times they do, or some real mob guys, because like my old guy used to say, the guy was with the captain would say, hey, crime don't pay. Like, in other words, he's not paying for everything. But it's how you carry yourself as part of the dress rehearsal. You don't want to go into a place like you're ready to do business and you look like, a guy walking around with Dockers and a polo shirt. Hey, that just doesn't happen. You got to put your alligator shoes on. You got to put your nylon socks, your Brioni, your tie, your Rolex watch, which to them was like, hey, you ever need money, you hock it. And then you come back and you buy it again. So it's all about giving that impression, because if you look successful, then you want to do business with that person. But if that person looks like a brokester, then you're a brokester.
Yeah. So speaking of doing business, you have to find some way to make yourself valuable and indispensable to earn the respect and trust of the family, right? You got to make money. You got to sort of pay that upwards, if you will. So you essentially have to be what they call an earner. What was your gig? What was your hustle that you walked into this with?
Well, I became a part owner of the strip club. That was first hustle. That was because of through the informant. Then I'm a guy who was in real estate. But the image I conjured up was that since I was from Miami, was that I was a drug dealer, that I had a lot of cash. Sometimes, when you have a lot of cash, you're an instant attraction too. But I was a guy who had a crew of Mariel boat lift Cubans that did stick-ups, that did home invasions, smash and grabs, And what I would do is, fortunately, every time the FBI locks up people, we have vaults of seized property, including mink coats, Rolex watches, diamonds, boats, planes, trains, and automobiles.
Right.
So I would come in and started making my way of saying to my guy, the captain, Greg De Palma, was like, hey, Greg, look, my guys just made a score, but they can't move this because it was a Rolex with diamonds. I says, why don't you give me around 3,500, $4,000 for this? And he would turn around and sell it for 8 or 9. So he was making money with me. So I would give him a couple of these watches. He would then get rid of them. He'd give me back the money. He was happy. So I proved to him that I was an earner. Many times he's told me in the past, we got enough shooters. We got enough of those. We're looking for earners. So he saw me with opportunities with televisions. Actually, we would go into Best Buy and buy a bunch of flat screen TVs and tell them that, hey, my Dominican guys up in the Heights made a score of a truck, and of course sell them that. So I was always hustling. I was a guy who they saw me as making money, and I was a guy who was in real estate. So I painted this whole image of me that, no, I wasn't a sucker, but at the same time, you want a guy like me that earns and knows what to do. And the what to do is very important in the mob. And that's, you got to kick up money. Okay. Nobody flies under the umbrella of a mob family if you are a connected guy without giving tribute payment. If I make money, money always goes up the ladder. Never does it come down. I could be a mob guy totally broke. No one's going to throw me a couple of fazools, as Greg would say. No, but I made a score. I got to give it to him. He gives it to those above. And that's how that machinery worked. I was a guy who would do that. I would actually go sometimes to Florida to work this dirty cop case that I was doing. I said, look, I'm going down there for a score. He would totally want me to go. I do my other case, and I come back with an envelope, maybe give him $2,000-3,000 in cash.
Yeah.
Here you go. It was a good score. Sometimes I come empty-handed.
Well, so as you're befriending this Greg De Palma, who is really central to this entire case, and then through Greg, all these other mobsters, in a lot of these meetings, I assume you're having to wear a wire. You weren't ever nervous they might frisk you or something like that? Especially early on when they're still trying to establish, is this guy for real? Let's just be sure. That never crossed your mind?
Well, the first time, I'm a big believer always wearing a wire. All of my past cases, I wore a wire. Why? Because it's indefensible, Glenn. If I capture you talking about a crime you're going to commit or committed, how are you going to refute that? You can't. So I've always believed in wearing a wire, even though it's so-called dangerous. Only few times I didn't wear it in the case, and that's because the case agent said it's going to be dangerous. You're going to be around some people. Don't wear it at the beginning. I fought it because I really believe that it's the most important thing as an undercover you could do.
Well, I get why it's so important, but you're telling me you're never, like, I don't know, at a restaurant and you're having some good food, you're having some nice vino, you sort of start getting carried away and suddenly you say something that you shouldn't have said, and then someone sort of looks across the table cross-eyed and thinks like, oh, we should pat this guy down. Like, that's never happened?
Never happened. Never had anyone put their hands on me. And if they did, there's a saying, because when you start to wonder whether you could trust someone or not, that is when you already know that you don't. Remember that. So now, let's say you don't trust me and you want to pat me down. You don't find anything. Do you trust me? No, because why did you do that? There's something I did, something I said, something that maybe you caught about my personality. That's not going to go away. The guy's not, if he puts his hand on you, that means he doesn't trust you. It's kind of over in a way, because now he's consumed with like, okay, well, he had it hidden. I'll find it again. Either I really found that I did it in a way like I didn't come in at first. I always look at when I did my undercover, just gradually get to know, do innocuous conversation, talk
Mhm.
about sports, talk about the spread of a basketball game, talk about things, get the person to like you, be generous. Hey, I got you a drink. What do you have? And yeah, and I let my personality get over. And then when I have to talk shop, then I will get into it. You can't go at the beginning and say, hey, Glenn, you want to move some dope for me? It's like, who's this guy? Where did he come? You have to look at body language. You got to know when to say. I always believe if I didn't ask you that question today, that's why God invented tomorrow. I'll try it again tomorrow. But you can't, you have to do it where there is no distrust or any question about who you are. I've never had anybody pat me down, nor would I allow it. That's number one. Somebody grab me, I throw them down. That's just not going to happen. Because, or if they insist, then guess what? I'm off the case, put somebody else in. Because he's never going to trust me again.
So, Jack, let me ask you, because you mentioned how, on the one hand, you're acting, on the other hand, you're sort of just letting your natural personality come out. You're, right, a naturally likable person, you're a gregarious person. I can see you like to socialize, you're probably an extrovert. Was there, and you're spending so much time with these people, did it ever get to a point where you're like, I mean, obviously they're, they're crossing the line. These are, criminals, but you're befriending them. That's part of being an undercover for years. Did you ever start to feel like, hey, these are friends of mine? I mean, Greg's a good guy. I mean, other than, that whatever the wire that gets, sort of tripped that makes him occasionally do something bad, you get to know these people like you would your own friends. Did those worlds sort of merge?
Well, yes to that is that keep in mind that you've assumed an identity that's not you. So anything that happens in that identity, it's make believe. So therefore, yes, I got along. There were guys in the mob that I've met who were great guys. We talk sports, we drink, we
Mm-hmm.
have fun time. There was even when I worked police corruption case in Hollywood Police Department, there were cops that they were so funny, guys that you would want to be friends with. But then you have to stop and say to yourself, what's wrong with you? What made you do this? Why are you doing this? Same with the mob guys. Why are you doing this when you could do so other good things? So I got to know their real personality, not the caricature or when they want to be tough guys. Like they always say, if you borrow money from a guy, he says, yeah, I'll give you the money. We may be friends, but next time I'm going to come at you in a different way if you don't pay. It's like these subtle threats. I approached it. I went out and had a good time. I had laughs with them, but I kept it in perspective that these guys were also capable of doing harm, not just to me, but to others out there. And that was just my job. It bothered me not much with the mob guys, but with the cop cases that I did. It hurt me to see dirty cops and sell their badge and tarnish the badge that we so proudly wear.
Mm-hmm.
That's what hurt me the most.
So, over the years, you became so close with De Palma that he offered to make you a made man, which is a really, really big deal. I know the case sort of ended before that happened, but the question I've got is, how is it you're spending so much time infiltrating the mafia to the point where you're literally on the cusp of being that big a role within the family, never having to have committed any kind of violence? Isn't that just sort of table stakes?
Well, that's a very good point. And let me tell you what was said to me. Greg De Palma,
Mm-hmm.
who was a captain at Gambino's, when he first approached me that, hey, listen, and just so you know, in order to be straightened out or become a made man, you either have to understand the rules of Cosa Nostra. You have to know what they're all about. You have to do the right thing. By right thing means you got to kick up money. Okay. You got to be prepared to do prison time. And also you have to be capable of committing violence. Now, Greg De Palma told me when he approached me and said, I want to propose you to get straightened out. First question he said, are you still dealing dope? And I said, hey, Greg, I never dealt dope, even though it was implied and people thought, he says, well, good, because you got any issues at all? Have you dealt drugs in the last 5 years? I said, no. He says, okay, well, that's good, because the statute of limitation. There is no drugs to be used at all or sold. We understand each other. Right. Okay, he says, well, that's good. Now, he said, let me tell you about what's in our life. We're looking for people like you, guys who are earners. We got enough knuckle draggers. We got enough guys who are hitters, killers. We have enough of that. We want earners. Now, this is where he said, now with a pregnant pause. He says, you could be called upon to do something in the future. Mm-hmm. So I'm playing dumb because I'm recording him. So I said, what's that, Greg? He says, well, you could go maybe dig a hole. You can go be a crash car. You can go maybe and deflect something. Mm-hmm. But you could be called to do that. Even though we got enough guys, this is what you could be called to do. I said, okay, I get that. Now, they still have it, meaning that you could still eventually whack somebody, mm-hmm. but it wasn't like in the old days that you had to kill somebody. Now, I've also talked to some mob guys who went on the witness protection program. They never whacked anybody. The thought was that if your hands are dirty, then you cannot testify because we know your hands are dirty. So no one will accept you. Well, they know a guy after Sammy the Bull who's got 19 hits. Does it really matter about getting your hands dirty? So that's why it's all about making money and doing the right thing. Okay. So he told me that wasn't the way of doing it anymore.
Okay. Well, this case, I believe, led to the arrest and conviction of 32 mobsters. Is that right?
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and then we had an extended case after that. We actually had a couple of doctors who were arrested because Greg De Palma would walk into these doctors' office, and I went with them. And the first thing he would do is go to the medicine cabinet, and all of the samples that doctors get, he would just put it in a bag, and then he would go to a dirty, crooked pharmacist who would sell it. So go figure that. So we wound up arresting them.
But I mean, I know you weren't the first undercover, but that's got to be a record. Like, no one ever brought down that number of people in any sort of, mafia family, right?
Well, there have been multiple arrests of many, but not in the undercover role.
Right.
Now, there is a question about Joe Pistone taken down with the numbers vary, whether how many he took. Do you hear anything from 100 to 200 or so people that were arrested, or did he simply testify in court on the case and then add it on to the list? Mm-hmm. I don't know that, but he obviously did he was a pioneer in the undercover. They played by different rules than we played by. So there you have that. But it was a successful case. But what made it successful, though, is what it's called an administration case. And Glenn, what an administration case means is that you take down the boss, the three of them, the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere. We took 2 out of 3 on that one. So that's what made it big. If you take down the hierarchy of the family, mm-hmm. that's what really sets it apart from other investigations.
Yeah. Jack, when I take a step back and think about your career as a whole, the diversity of undercover roles that you played is quite extensive. So you've been, just to name a few, you've been a money launderer, a drug dealer, a gangster. You've been involved in police corruption, political corruption. You've dealt with Asian and Russian organized crime, on and on. And what's amazing is sometimes you're juggling upwards of 6 different identities and roles at the same time. So I'm trying to think of how to even describe this, this talent. And we sort of talked about it to some degree. It's almost like being an improv actor, but, much greater consequences. But I was just sort of wondering, when you got all these different roles, all these different disguises, that you're using in parallel, not sequentially. Do you ever sort of lose track of where you are in each of the different stories and who said what to who? Does that ever happen?
Yes, it does. I didn't set out to do this, Glenn, keep in mind. But what happened is, as I'm doing Undercover for many years, I developed friendships with other case agents in the FBI. And you kind of develop some kind of reputation. So when people create an undercover case or a scenario, they'll tap on me and they'll say, hey, Jack, could you do that? I've had problems saying no at a dinner table, and I got problems saying no to a brother or sister who needs a job to be done. So they kind of grew in that direction. Now, it was a little consuming. I remember having, it was either, I think it was 5 phones, all of them would set different rings, and I would know who was calling. But again, going back to what I said to you earlier, there's no accountability. Like if a cop called me that was a dirty cop case that I'm working, I don't have to answer him. I'll call him when I want to because he's chasing me. Okay, when I'm doing with the Russian organized crime, the same way. To loan the money, he's chasing me. But when I deal with the mob, there is that accountability. That one time, we used to have Nextel. Remember the Nextel phones? Which like a walkie-talkie. All of a sudden, I'm working down in Florida. I hear the old man. I used to call him the old man. Who, by the way, Greg De Palma was a celebrity gangster. He owned the Westchester Premier Theater, which at the time is where Frank Sinatra, the who's who was in it. So anyway, he would call me, and one day he calls me when I was in Florida, and he says, Jackie boy, pick up. And I didn't because I was with some other people, turned it off, come home the next day. He says, hey, where were you yesterday? I said, I was in Florida. I told you. He says, why didn't you pick up? I said, I was in the middle of something. He goes, you're in the middle of something. How do I know you didn't get arrested? How do I know you're not recording me right now? How do you know this? I go, what are you talking about, Greg? He says, when I call you, I don't care what time of day it is, you pick up. Do you understand me? I says, I want all my guys to do that in my crew. So sure enough, like later on, weeks go by, I get all of a sudden at 2 o'clock, I'm in my undercover apartment. I hear the phone, Jackie boy. So I answer, I go, yeah, Greg, I'm like half asleep. He says, I'm sitting here watching Rio Bravo on the Turner channel. So I go, yeah, what can I do? Just checking in on you. And then, of course, the other guys on the crew will be saying, freaking Greg called me at 4 o'clock in the morning yesterday. So he felt that was what had to done. So getting back to the situation, that was the only case. That accountability was the only one really that I did. I could blow off everybody else, but I couldn't blow them off. Even when my mother-in-law passed away and I was at the wake, that phone rang. And guess what? I went outside and I answered it because I didn't want it to be set back. So these are things that, I prioritize the importance of who. And of course, if I'm in the middle of something big, then that gets my priority. But I've always kept Greg De Palma as my priority because I knew that in that life, that was very important to be always available.
If you're having to prioritize the undercover life or lives, should I say plural, there had to be some kind of collateral damage, if you will, in terms of your personal life. Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough on my family. I had a young daughter and I was hardly ever home. I missed many holidays. I think because my wife came from a law enforcement family, she was very understanding of it, but she would always say, look, we're going to do this, but I'm assuming you're not going to be there, because I couldn't go home. When I came home, my neighbors would look at me. Who is this guy? I would show up in a Benz 500 or a Hummer H2. They would, I was like the drug dealer in the neighborhood, So she would go out to, where's your husband? I saw your husband with this new car. I saw this. What does your husband do for a living? And then, I would come in dressed in a suit. And another day I would dress in my guayabera when I came to visit her because I had a short window to see her and my daughter. But she understood. And the really bad thing that came out of this, I think, because she was very helpful and very strong, and I think that's why I'm grateful for her, is that when I did my undercover work, I didn't have to worry about home. I didn't have to worry about my marriage. I felt that she was supportive. So I had a clear head. Unlike how it would have been like, oh my God, I was 100% focused on the task at hand. So that's kind of how I treated being that. But what it did affect me was, of course, my health, my weight issue. I was eating 24, I was eating more than in a cruise ship. It was mob guys here for breakfast, for lunch. Everything centers around eating. And then, working out. I remember wearing the Ticini training suits. Everybody was wearing these training suits. Nobody worked out. Nobody said to me, hey, Jack, you want to work out? Nobody did that. It was all everybody wearing training suits and nobody worked out at all.
Right.
So, that came out of it. So in hindsight, what I did was good for the Bureau, but it wasn't good for Jack Garcia.
Yeah. No, I appreciate your sharing. I've heard you say that being an undercover isn't something you learn. It's something you're born with. Do you really think that? You think it's something innate?
Absolutely. You can't teach this. It's you got to have the trade, which is you have to be, first of all, outgoing. If you're not an outgoing person,
Yeah.
how are you going to do this job? You have to be comfortable around all types of people and all types of discussions. You have to be like a chameleon. You got to be able to do things. You have to be able to like fit in all types of environment. If you're a guy from the Midwest and you're out there in a social club, you're going to stand out. You got to have like confidence, exude confidence, not confidence to the level of you may get, wishful thinking that you're going to get hurt, but, like feel, strong about yourself. These are all important traits that if you don't have them as an adult, there's no way you're going to teach that, because the longer you spend with a subject, the longer that could slip and you revert back to your normal self. So I was always the same because I always, like I said to you earlier, I assume a personality of being this happy, gregarious, jovial guy. And if I needed to escalate, I would escalate. I'd get down with you. But if I didn't, why do? But if I would have came in there like a flaming asshole, excuse my French, then how are you going to get? You can't get past your first impression. So you do have to be like a good bullshit artist. And Glenn, you've seen people like that growing up in high school, in college, in workplace. These guys could sell snow to an Eskimo, as they say. And that's what you need. And you can't teach that. You either have it or you don't.
Well, and also, I think you're a really good read of people, if you will, high EQ, right? Because you have to be able to go into these different circumstances and understand there's the natural, gregarious, and affable Jack, but also, okay, what's this Greg De Palma all about? What's he looking for? How does he get to trust people, right? And everyone has a different way of befriending and building trust and rapport. So I assume that's a big trait as well.
Very big, yes. It certainly, you have to read, like you said, people, know about them, know how much you can push, know how much you can get away with. I mean, sometimes, you may not want to. You have to show, like I said, deference to someone because of their position or rank, when deep down inside you want to tell them something else, But it's something that you read, and I felt like I was always that way, even with the drug dealers and with the cops. It's something you really can't explain. But what gets people hurt are those who think they could do this. This is not like Silence of the Lambs when Clarice goes and studies to become. You either have this or you don't. It's something that the good thing is I used to teach in the undercover school is you put people to the test. There are little problems that I see it used to be in the undercover school where they think that a person doing undercover is certified to do all types of undercover. Now, Glenn, there's a lot of undercover work that I will not do and cannot do, like innocent images. Why would I want to do that? I don't. I'm grateful there are agents who are willing to do that. But just because I'm certified doesn't mean I have to do that. There's also like heavy duty white collar crime stuff. I'm not that good with numbers. I can't pose as some kind of accountant. So you have to understand your limitations. And if you don't understand your limitations, again, the case is going to be short-lived and you possibly could get hurt.
I think over the 26-year career, you worked on over 100 major undercover investigations. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
That's got to be a record.
Yeah, plus all the many buys. I mean, we did in the drug squads, we used to do called buy bust, where you have an informant who will tell you about this guy who is selling dope. So I go meet the guy, I buy the dope, we arrest him and me, we flip him, we go to the next level, you go up the ladder. I don't even know how many of those we did, because I was blessed. I worked in a squad in Queens, New York, near just the zone where all the drugs, the little Cali as they call it, Jackson Heights. And we worked with about 20 police officers. These guys were fantastic, NYPD, plus the 20 agents. So everybody had sources. We were rocking and rolling. I mean, we led the bureau, not New York office, which is the starship of the bureau. We led the bureau in arrest, seizures for dope, seizures for money. I would come into work before the mob case. And even with the mob case, I did some of these mob. We would go in and say, today we're doing this. Today we're doing that. And who did the undercover? Me. So we would go out, lock up this guy, take a key off him, flip him, do another. Sometimes it work around the clock. But it was great being around that energy. It wasn't like, oh, man, I'm exhausted. I can't do that. Oh, I don't want to. You just rolled with it, man. You were just pumped. It's a constant adrenaline rush, which is what I miss the most being retired. That adrenaline rush is gone. I mean, what do I get hired? Who's on Judge Judy?
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you replace it?
You don't. You'd replace it by, it's like my wife says, you got to get going. You got to do something. I mean, I went from like supersonic speed nonstop to this, and that's a tough adjustment.
Yeah, it's like retired professional athletes.
Right, exactly. And now it's like you miss it. You want to get involved. You want to help out. You want to dish out there. But, the Bureau has this thing that once you leave, you're like persona non grata. And that's wrong. They should tap on. I would love to be able to pass on all of my knowledge, or that be an advisor to those who may need this type of help.
Yeah. Jack, the name of the podcast you're on here, of course, is The Art of Excellence. And I always end by turning the mic over to my guests with the question of, what does the word excellence mean to you?
Excellence would be being the best in what you set out to do. Not the best in comparison to others that do the same work, but the best in you, whatever you have to offer. And you always should go out in everything you do. Like my father would say, you look at yourself in the mirror. Did you give it 100%? And if the answer to that is yes, then you have attained excellence.
That's a great answer. I don't know if I gave 100% here, but I tried to.
I think you do. You got a good reputation, a great reputation.
Well, thank you. This was, honestly, I could spend another hour or two just digging into the stories, and I know you've got a lot of them. But Jack, what an incredible career. You may not recognize it, but I certainly can see that there were multiple occasions where you probably, maybe inadvertently, must have put yourself in harm's way, and doing it for the sake of taking down crime and improving streets and bettering society. I thank you for what you did over this 26 years. And it's an absolute pleasure to spend the time with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Likewise, Glenn. Great show, and a pleasure meeting you. All the very best.
Hey, thanks for listening. Okay, don't go yet, please. 2 favors. I ask simply 2 favors. One, if you could please download the iTunes app. You could do it on your phone. You could do it on the computer. Take 60 seconds and leave a review. It means a lot. 2, you can find my episodes on several social media sites, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Find the one that you like the most. Find the one where you tend to have a lot of friends and followers. And if you could please either share it in the case of Facebook and LinkedIn, or retweet it on Twitter, that would mean the world to me. So those are the two asks I have. I love putting together this podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.